As many of you already know, the myths and legends of elves primarily originate in Teutonic myth. Okay, Nordic, for those of you that need that understanding. Okay, and it starts out with the Lafalfar, the Dakalfar, which is also the Niflvar, and the Svartalfar. Now, these are not mortal races because they live in Yggdrasil. Okay? Yggdrasil, for those of you that are not aware, is the world tree. In Nordic mythology and Teutonic mythology, all of the worlds, all of the planes of existence are connected to this tree. Okay? It's kind of like, for lack of a better word, a web of branches and leaves and that connect them all. And so one of those branches, is called, well, there's a variety of them. Most of you are familiar with Asgard, so at least that gives you a stepping on point. Anyway, so the mythology of elves begins there. There's a intrusion by the plane of chaos, which causes a great deal of upheaval, and the magician at that time, which wasn't me, well, I have that person's memories, but it wasn't actually me. Um, brought the elves to another plane. Not all of them, obviously. Some of them stayed behind, but a decent number of the original three crossed over. They did what I call the crossing, and they arrived in the Terran plane. When they arrived in the Terran plane, they subdivided into 13 tribes. Okay? Because the original three could not survive in this new primordial world. In this primordial world, it was lava and dragons and giants. There was nothing established. It was a pure primordial chaotic planet in this particular case, Terra. So the three original elven races, subdivided into 13. Okay, and those 13 tribes are what I just handed to you. Okay, or what Chilla Moonsnow has handed to you, actually. All right. Originally, so it divides into, I show you how it divides in. 4 of the types come from the Los Alvar or the Laf Alfar, depending on, if you're talking about an individual or a racial or the group. And from there, you've got basically high elves, moon elves, sylvan elves, and desert elves. Okay. High elves would be like It's your little coyote over here. Valsharis coyote is a high elf. Okay? There are, you know, some racial subdivisions. The gold elf, the sun elf, fairy elf, all fall under high elf. Okay? She is a good example of a high elf. Moon elves, you know, look over here at Jalil Artharius. Okay? She's an example of a moon elf. Okay? I believe Jalil Moonstar, Moon Snow. You are a moon elf also, are you not? Yes, she's a moon. Yes. Silver elves, which some people may be familiar with the Qualinesti from Dragonlance. You know, they are moon elves. Silver elves, gray elves, snow elves, and ice elves all fall under moon elf. Okay. And then you have the Sylvan elf. Now, what most people consider to be a wood elf is actually a Sylvan elf. Like ESO, Elder Scrolls Online, the if you choose a wood elf in that game, you're actually choosing a Sylvan elf because wood elves are very different. I'll hit those in a little bit. And by the way, for those of you that are Tolkien-esque, um, this all of this research that I'm talking about um, is stuff that he had hit as well. You know, his his teacher's assistant was one of my archaeology teachers. So I know a little bit about about his research. Okay, and then so copper elves, the Sylvan elf, is what most people call a wood elf. Okay, they have human colored skin. They have standard flesh colors, usually brown hair, red hair, typically. Okay, as a as opposed to wood elf, which we will talk about soon. Desert elf. Okay, these are the elves that, obviously, as it would sound, take up the the hot areas of the world. Athosian, the Athosian elf, Shadow elf, the Eclipse elf. All of these are the types of elves that dwell in deserts, hot areas. You know, not necessarily the underground. You'll see that in a little bit, but above world in the bright sun. Okay, they usually are tanned, tattooed, tall. They do a lot of you know they do a lot of running. Okay, and they do a lot of uh, their abilities, their spells usually consist of things like summon water and endurance, things like that. Okay. And then from the Niflvar, the Doc Elfar with two Ks, you get the Star Elves, Dark Elves, which are Doc Elfar, and the Undead Elf. Now, Star Elves, they look like the original Niflvar. They have pure white skin, black hair, and bright blue eyes. And yes, I'll get there in just a second. There are, and I will explain that one. Okay. And Star elves, they're a little imperialistic. Okay, they believe in their version of law is very is pretty is a little bit on the strict side. Now they do believe in goodness and love and all that jazz, but they are imperialistic in the fact that if you don't believe in beauty and love, they will kill you. They often hunt. I mean, they live in the astral plane, in a city in the astral plane, and they're the ones who hunt the illithid. That is just like Dukalfar hate illithids. So do star elves. Okay, so jumping down to the dark elf. Of course, I have discussed dark elves so many times in the past that it's you should all know them, know us by now. Subdivision of dark elves is the drow. But they're still the same race. Okay, there's no racial difference there. It's just that it's it's a subdivision because Loth or Loth, depending on how you want to pronounce it, made a deal with an Oberonth and caused dark elves, who originally looked like star elves, to be reversed. So instead of having the black hair and the white skin, they have white hair and black skin. Yes, it's commonly called the sundering. So she caused that. You know, she made a deal with an Oberonth. And for those of you that don't know what an Oberonth is a demon race that is before demons existed. Chthonic entities. Some it's often referred. And seventh, because and this has already been mentioned, and I will so I know it's under thought. The banshee, the undead elf. When the when the crossing occurred, some elves did not survive. Okay, some elves did not survive the crossing because it was it was harrowing. It was not all that much fun to plane travel with an entire race. Okay, some people stayed behind, but hey, basically, okay, they were okay. The banshees were all the types of elves because this is before they subdivided. Okay, but and they come from the Niflvar. Okay, they don't come from the Lasilvar, which are the high elves. They come from the Niflvar. Niflvar were death elves. Okay, they were in Teutonic myth. They were the ones that took care of the dead after Valkyries brought them to heaven, quote unquote. Okay, Valkyries would pick up the souls of the fallen, and they were subdivided depending on how they lived their life. Of the Niflvar that took care of them from there. They are patrons of the dead. All right, so the Banshee were the Niflvar that didn't survive the crossing. Okay, but so they're undead, but they're not. Okay, unlike regular undead, because regular undead are connected to the nether plane, and they're they were dead, and then they came back to life. Banshee died in the crossing. Okay, so they still have everything any regular elf would have. They're they're not really alive, but they're not really dead either. Okay, And they, unlike any other type of any actual undead, they can actually procreate like any mortal being. Okay. So, they're not dead inside. you know, yeah, there are a lot of generally undead cannot procreate. Okay. But there are two kinds that can because they're not really undead. They're undead ish. Banshees and Dampier. Dampier can also, because they're not truly undead, they are, you know, they're like born undead, as one might say. Banshees, undead elves, are among the only two that are like that. Okay. Yes, exactly. Jalil Baineth actually has some familiarity with Dampier. Very few people know. And banshees are like that. Okay? Banshees, the closest to any understanding of undead that you can gain is they're mostly like a Dampier. Okay? Hopefully that helps. You can always ask questions about it later. And then the third type of, oftentimes that is true, the third elven race that came across was the Svartalfar. Okay? Now, when the Svartalfar, they're the ones, they were the stone elves. They were the ones that did all the building. They're the crafters for Asgard and all the different realms. When they came across, they subdivided into wood elves, and you're actually wood elves here because they're green with brown hair or brown with green hair. Okay, not like typically the sylvan elf, which most people call a wood elf. If you have, you will definitely see wood elves in Tolkien works. If you are familiar with the very old cartoon that they did for The Hobbit, you you will note that those, yeah, also ElfQuest has them too. In the old Tolkien cartoon, they had the king of the wood elves was actually a wood elf, not like in the new movies or anything where they're sylvan elves. Okay. Now then the Varial, who a lot of you are familiar with because we have a few Avarials in the GA. Avarials are winged elves. They have hollow bones, so they're not as physically strong as humans, but they can fly because they have wings. And then the aquatic elf, and subsequently the trench elf. Trench elf is just a one that is an aquatic elf at the very, very deep sea. Obviously, aquatic elves are abnormally strong, especially trench elves, because their body's really tough because they're used to living at the bottom of the ocean, right? Okay. Yeah. There are a variety, as you'll see at the top. Let me continue here. But if you'll see at the top, you'll notice that these are just the racial types, not the ethnic groups that come from it. There are many ethnic groups. Okay. Then the wild elves. Wild elves Um, Jalil Artharius mentioned ElfQuest. ElfQuest is full of wild elves. Okay, the main characters are wild elves. Okay, because wild elves bond with an animal. Okay, and when they bond with an animal or animal type, yep, the Wolf Riders, they get some. They share blood. Okay, so number one, wild elf is always going to be in the company of an animal type, whether it's a hawk or a wolf or a tiger. They'll always be in the company of one. If they don't have one, a raccoon. If they're not in the current company of one, that's because they have separate missions. Okay. All right. Lothari are a type of wild elf. All right. Um, Lothari are like werewolves, except they're elves. Okay. And obviously, they're not undead. Okay. They're more like lichen. It's like the elven lichens. Okay. It's like an yeah. Well, that's the best way to put it. It's like lichen. You guys are all familiar with. Lothari are the elven version of a lichen. Okay. Number 12, gray elves. Now, you may look at that and go, hey, didn't you mention gray elves before? Well, that's why I spelled that one with an E and this one with an A, because that one is a moon elf. The one with an E is a is a silver elf. It's a Qualinesti. It's a moon elf. This type of gray elf is gray skinned and usually has red hair. They usually have gray skin and red hair, and they could could be could be black, could be white, but typically red. Um, Fire elves, slate elves. These are the ones that live in volcanoes. These are the ones that run around in extreme heats. You know, with no issues. Not even their hair burns. You know, most of their spellcraft is fire related. You know, walk on lava, fire resistance. You know, they are attuned to fire, as they say. All right, and then the 13th one here, dwarves. Yes, dwarves are come from the Svartalfar. Dwarves are technically elves. They are the stone elves. Okay. Technically, dwarves are still elves. Yes, they are their own race, but because just like all elven types are their own race, at least these 13, but they their origin is from the elves, and that is from Teutonic Nordic mythology as well. Okay, they're the ones that, as the name would suggest, and what everybody knows about dwarves, that they're the ones who make uh, who make the weapons and armor for the Asgardians. The original stone elves, okay, before they crossed over, that's who they are the closest related to. Okay, subdivision of the Svartalfar. All right, now of those 13 tribes, four of those 13 tribes started another type of subrace that actually became its own thing. From the Star Elves, you get the Githyanki. And now Jalil Artharius is familiar with Githyanki. It's one of the only people that I know that are. Githyanki are a subdivision of the Star Elves, and they are opposite of the Star Elves. Whereas the Star Elves want to, well, the Githzeri are humans, but but yes, the Githzeri have stolen the technology of the Star Elves. They are humans that became corrupted by Star Elven tech. Yes. Whereas Githyanki are a subdivision of the same race. They are still elves, but they are very evil. Whereas Star Elves, yeah, they want to control the universe and make and put order in it, but they wanted, but because they believe that love and beauty should be the way the world is, and if you're not that way, you need to die. um, the Githyanki, they are the opposite of that. They believe that beauty needs to die. Okay, they believe that there should be no law in the universe. Everything should die. It's okay. They can die. It's all right with them, with the Githyanki. And yes, that is because of a star elf named Gith, who who turned against the star his fellows and started his own cult, and then his cult um, descended into the Githyanki. The Githzari are some humans that decided to follow Gith. Githyanki and Githzeri don't actually get along, but at all. But neither of them like the Star Elves, and Star Elves don't like either of them. Okay? And then from the Dark Elves, we get the Deep Elf. The Deep Elf, sometimes called the Ghost Elf, is pure white. Okay? And they still have the red eyes of a dark elf, and the white hair of a dark elf, but they also have white skin. Okay, a lot of times they have digressed into to be animalistic. Cannibals, a lot of times they have gone into cannibalism. Not always, of course. Depends upon you know a leader. An intelligent leader can change everything. But as a race, they have digressed to be considerably more animalistic. They're they are feral. They have claws. Their fingers have developed into claws. They can even so that they can and they have um, excellent hearing and sense of smell. Um, they can smell if everyone can smell fresh earth, right? You guys are all familiar with the smell of fresh earth. Well, ghost elves, if some other smell comes within 100 yards of them, they know it, like a like wolves do, like your wolf types out there. Ghost elves have the uh, sense of smell that a wolf has, but they're blind. Here's something else about the ghost elves: they're blind. Okay, um, their other senses are very heightened, but they are blind. Okay, now from the wood elves, here's where orcs come in. All right, orcs are related to elves, guys. Orcs uh, are a perversion of the wood elf. Okay, it's been theorized that that they have were perverted on purpose because there's an orc leader many moons ago, who they revere as a god, that just like Loth or Loth, there is an orc version of Loth, okay, who perverted this group of wood elves and they became the Iron Elves long before Zig ever existed. This individual was a is named Orcus. Okay, he is an orc god. Okay, uh, and he perverted the people, this group of wood elves, and made them into Iron Elves. Now, not all orcs are bad guys, because some of them have seen the light, as they might, as one might say, but their origins are just like dark elves. You know, dark elf origin is very evil. The iron elf origin is very evil. Okay, and then finally from the dwarves we get gnomes. Okay, and where we get gnomes from is that many moons ago the dwarves were digging like they do, right? And they found this glowing blue rock. Okay. Now, every dwarf that was near this glowing blue rock became smaller, more. Their brains increased in size. They became smarter on a certain level. Okay, not the common sense level. And they started talking really, really, really fast. There are no uh, there are no pauses in gnome speech. There are no commas. There are no periods. It's just a one run-on sentence. Okay. Now they retain the ability to build, and they are very awesome builders, just like dwarves are. Okay, but they by their inventions are not as practical as dwarves. Okay, they don't. Their brains are constantly in motion, so they can't. Nothing is ever done. If they build something, they spend their entire life working on it, even though it was probably done, within the first 3 months of them building it. They spend the next 600 years working to perfect it. Oftentimes that means that it's going to blow up so often because their perfections end up causing more damage than good. Okay. Goblin builds are supposed to blow up. Goblins, they are designed to, they make blow up things. Gnomes, their stuff's not supposed to blow up, but it does anyway. So if you get a black powder rifle from a gnome, expect it to blow up in your face. Okay, they can do it. They have the technology, but it will blow up in your face. All right. I know that was a quick down and dirty on the 13 types of elves and then the 4 subdivisions, and it's a lot to swallow. Yep, Neblin, excellent gnome. Okay. I know that's a lot to swallow. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to think about what questions you have while I go and move my clothes from the washer to the dryer. All right. I do hope that you guys talk about it and think about questions so that when I come back, you can throw stuff at me. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. Two things. Hopefully, you do have more. You do have questions, but I did want to mention that some of you may be familiar with the actual undead banshee, which is typically an elf that dies in childbirth, and that keeps them locked onto this plane of existence. That is. Yes, I know, I ran, so I'm a little out of breath. My apologies. Um, but they retain a lot of the same abilities, and they have the same basic appearance, and so they are given the same name, Banshee. Obviously, um, Sidhe, which looks like city, is pronounced she. And so the original Banshees were Bansidhe, Banshee. Okay. Anyway, thought that it was a pertinent piece of information that even they both possess the same name, but the undead type, actual undead type, is got its name because they have the same appearance and as the other. Okay, so questions. So a few minutes have passed. Hopefully, it's given you guys time to look over the card and discuss what I said, and you have questions that you can throw out. The name of the rock, well, the dwarves just called it the Chaos Stone. They didn't, and it has actually been gone by several names throughout history. Um, it's been called the Gray Stone. Um, it's been called the Chaos Stone. It's been called the Mana Stone. So, do we have the name? Well, we have names that it's been called. Its actual name has never been truly revealed. No, it's not an actual ore. It is a blue rock. Although there is a consensus among a thought process among uh, various alchemists that there is a blue stone that is mineable that has the same similar properties. You know. Okay, Belladas for your attendance, Jalil Ortharius. Uh, I self, that would be Qualinesti, not Sylvanesti. Sylvanesti would be a high elf. I selves are among the moon elves. Okay. And yes, Comet is she's a high elf. They are the descendants of the light elves, which are the Loselvar, or um, or Lafelfar, depending on which one you want to use. So they are the direct descendants of them. Okay. Um, the Fae, thank you. Fae come from another plane of existence, and goblins are a subtype of Fae. And there are, that there's a close relationship between the Fae and elves. In fact, fairy elf, which is a subdivision of high elves, have considerable, what's the word, relationship, have a very tight relationship with the Fae. Elves in general have tight relationship with the Fae because they have the same basic principles. Yes, Fae are very chaotic. Elves are not really so much, but they both share a common bond with nature, goodness, and beauty. Okay, and that does go all the way across the board, all the way down the Fey lines and all the way down the Elven lines. Now, it may be perverted to a certain degree because, example, a dark elven painting might look like just a black wall to someone else. To a dark elf, they can see in a different spectrum of light, so they see it entirely different than, so that their vision of what beauty looks like may be different. That's the same thing with goblins. They have a altered visual spectrum, so they are going to see things, see beauty in places that other people might not see beauty. Okay, but it is still important because they are a Fey type. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Did I answer your question, Jalil Winterwolf? Sylvanesti are high elves. Qualinesti are moon elves. Which brings up another point. You may see all kinds of different elves throughout, books and video games and movies, etc., etc. They are all ethnic varieties. Okay, and it is possible, and it is possible she could be born to high elves. It's possible. So, what can be said about high elves except for they have noble blood? Well, high elves, when they arrived on this plane of existence, they decided that society was how they were going to be able to survive. Okay? They built cities, they created a social order. Okay? Whereas, all the elven varieties, they chose something to make them survive in this, primordial world. What the high elves did is they built cities and social and society, people to protect each other, and city walls, and streets and roads and fountains, and to protect themselves from the dragons and giants and lava out in the world. So high elves have the closest social order, closest society, closest setup to the original elves. Where everyone else, they adopted to their adaptation. High elves didn't. They crafted a bit of home. There we go. They brought home with them rather than make a new home like everybody else did. They brought home with them. Does that make sense? So they are the most like the light elves. High elves. High elves are the most like the light elves. Light elves, as the name would suggest, glow. Okay? And no human has actually been able to discern the features of a light elf because they glow. And they can tell that they are beautiful people, but that's all they really know. Okay? And the high elf is as close to the celestial races as you can get. Okay? They still have the same morals and ethics and society that the originals did. Okay. Any other questions? So everything on there makes sense. No one else has any other questions. They completely get the Lasalvar, the Svardelvar, the Niflvar. That all makes sense. Yes, Star Elves and Dark Elves have the same ancestor. They do. In fact, they looked identical until Loth, depending on how you want to pronounce, perverted the Dark Elves. Okay? She made a deal with a chthonic entity because she was in love with the king of the elves, and she wanted enough. Yes, Curl on the Raytheon. You're right. She was in love with the king of the elves, and she felt like she needed more power so that she could be equal with him, and then he would love her back. Well, that kind of backfired because then she got black skin, white hair, and became sadomasochistic. He said no. No, yeah, the chthonic entity kind of blackmailed her or black skinned her or whatever you want to do it, whenever you want to call it. But her plan did not work. It backfired. And so he married somebody else who he was in love with anyway, you know. But he liked Loth. She was cool. They hung out. May if she hadn't screwed up, maybe it would have worked. Who knows? But it is difficult when you're a royal to start dating somebody who's not a royal. Yes, that's correct. Elistray. But that is unwed. They were never married. So Elistray is a bastard child. Actually, all of Lost's children are bastards. Most of them were eaten, though, so the few that survived are bastards. There you go. Any other questions? This is true. Better to be a bastard than eaten. You are very, very, very correct. And her two children that survived, besides Elistray, because she also survived, but she was taken under Corellan's wing, you know, and retrained. But her two children that were not eaten, they felt the exact same way. There are, since she's a spider, she has had several children. Okay, but most of them were eaten. You're right, but two of her children decided to take revenge on her. But anyway, that's right. That is true. She's. It's a not uncommon quote from her that you do not leave your potential enemies alive. That is a very common quote that she has put out. And that old saying, keep your friends close, your enemies closer? That's also her. And that's why the two children that got away and came back and ate her were not very welcome. Okay. Any other questions? I know that I'm going to have to shut this down because we got other things. I just. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. A Varial, they are a number 9. They fall under they are a subdivision of the Svartalfar. The Svartalfar were the builder race for in Yggdrasil. They were the ones that were closer to nature, as one might say, that uh, very in touch with the tree and the worlds, and of those, Averial is one of the subdivisions of the Svartalfar, along with wood elves, aquatic elves, wild elves, slate elves, and dwarves. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Anyone? This, I mean, I have to close early today anyway, but I would, I'm open to questions. No problem. Okay. Yeah, I do realize, and I apologize. You do realize that is a lot of information I dropped on you guys. Okay. Blood elves. Okay. Thank you. Blood elves are a racial subtype. Okay. They are a racial subtype, and they are a racial subtype of desert elves. Okay. I mean, my apologies, not racial subtype. They are an ethnic group. Okay. They are the Sindori. Okay. Blood elves from World of Warcraft are the Sindori, and they are an ethnic group of desert elves. I did mention a couple of ethnic groups on here. Um, the Sylvanesti, the Qualinesti, the Darganesti, the Kaganesti, and the Sindori. But there are many, many, many ethnic groups out there. Okay, I couldn't list them all. Um, but rather they are not a separate racial type or a separate or one of the direct 13 tribes. All of the other ones that you can think of are ethnic varieties uh, of one of the 13 tribes. Okay, or one of the subsets of the 13 tribes, because there are a variety of those as well. But I tried to give you uh, all the information in as clear and concise format as I could. Um, but if and when you have questions, feel free to ask. Okay. And none? I'm glad you asked the question about the rock. That was a good question. And also the question about the banshee. We talked that was good also. Stuff that needs to go out there. Um for lack of just because if you're familiar with ESO and Skyrim, the Falmer are a subdivision of Ghost Elf, a subdivision of the Deep Elves. Okay? I know that in ESO they call them a subdivision of Snow Elves, but that's not entirely true. They're really a subdivision of Deep Elves. You know, Snow Elves are a subdivision of Moon Elves. So there is some slight discrepancy there, but generally speaking, it's pretty in line, you know. But for whatever reason, in Skyrim, they they made their moon elves turn into Falmer, which means the moon elves aren't anywhere else. They don't have moon elves in Skyrim. They turned them into Falmer, but really the Falmer were a subdivision of Dark Elves, and that's okay. It's no big deal. But just clarification's sake, so people can understand it, make it easier to understand. Did everyone understand when I was talking about banshees? That there are two varieties of banshees. You got the banshees that crossed over and are actually a living undead race. Yep, there are two varieties of banshees. They're the ones living undead. I don't know how you can. I don't know the best way to put that, but they have unlife rather than undeath. And then there are the ones that actually died and came back to life as an undead form. All right. And so there is a different version. There are two different types of undead elves. I mean, a vampire elf is an undead elf, but it is not the racial. It is not the racial type. You know, the racial type of undead elf is not actually undead. Okay, not like vampires and zombies and and banshees. It is still a banshee, but it is not the same banshee. And I know that's really confusing. That's why I keep, you know, hitting that target. Oh yes, we have a vampire elf in the room. That's right. There you go. Actually, good timing. Vendugilla Rose. We were just talking about undead elves. Could someone drop that card to her, Jill Gothley, or you know, I mean, that way if I'm gonna be doing this for another 15 minutes at most, but I want to get out all the questions out. She just walked in the door. Heather, Jilla Rose, and we were just she's it's funny. We're just talking about undead elves, and she walks in the door. So her ears must have been burning. But there is a difference between the racial type of banshee and the undead type. Okay, and that's what I want to. So want to make certain that everyone understands. Okay, because the undead, the racial type, died when they were in the crossing, and then they were still animated when they got here. Okay, and so that made them in this perpetual uh, limbo where they're not dead and not alive. Okay, but they can still, just like other elves, they can still be killed. However, they can only be killed, and they can be killed in the same way you can destroy, because you can't kill a vampire. You destroy vampires. You cannot kill one because they're already dead. An undead elf, this type of banshee that we're referring to, can be killed because it's not truly undead. It's like a dhampir. Okay? That is the closest. Yes, they can be healed. Also, yes. Whereas a true undead will take damage from a healing spell. The racial banshee, the banshee, the racial type, I know I keep saying that. Maybe I need to come up with a new name. I don't know. But that's how it's listed. So in historically speaking, so I tried to stay as close as I could. But there are a difference between the racial type and the traditional banshee that's an elf that died in childbirth. But there are so few of those that I'm not sure that matters a lot. So I guess it's doesn't matter for me to try to differentiate so much. But anyway, yes, the banshee can be healed like a normal elf. It doesn't take damage from a healing spell like a vampire would. And they can procreate, and they can be killed. They do have a lifespan, just like any other elf. It is very long, just like all elves. Okay, but it is not longer. It's the same potential lifespan. Elves can live up to 2,000 years, which is a massive amount of time. Okay, to a human, that they might as well be gods, you know, because they can, you know, 100 generations can pass, and the elf has barely reached 100 generations of humans have passed, and an elf is middle aged. Okay. Any other questions? Angela Rose, if you have questions. Yes. Valsharis Coyote. Oh my gosh, is it time already? Okay. 11 minutes. Oh, yeah, exactly. A few hundred years, then they're middle aged. That's right. A few hundred generations, not years. A few hundred human generations. So, you know, uh, using the Earth terminology, if an elf were born during the proverbial time of Christ, they would just now be um, old and old enough to cross over and say, okay, now my time is done. Okay, 2,000 years later, it's like, all right, now it's time for me to pass on and die of old age. If that gives you any idea, if you want to use that, that I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, think about all the things that have happened in the time of the proverbial birth of Christ, all the way up to now. Well, an elf will have lived through that whole thing. You know, the Roman Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Alexandrian time, Elizabethan expansion, all of it, all of the things that humans have done in the last 2,000 years, that would have been one lifetime of an elf. You know? Now they remember. It depends on what they do. You know? Elves are not in a hurry either, because they're like, um, a a human can have been born, grown up, went to war, died, and was buried by the time an elf has had his breakfast or her breakfast in this particular in the whatever the case may be. Elves are not in a hurry. If they need to do something quick, then it is must be really really important. You know. And it's one of the things that humans don't like about elves. It's like, they're like, you don't care about anything. You just don't care about anything. And elf's like, no, it's not that I don't care about anything. It's just that I got all the time in the world, you know? But, you know, that's that's what separates an elven mind from a human mind. Humans don't have all the time in the world, you know? And that's why when major events occur and like Atal Maru or Nargaroth, to get the elven race spurred into action, then something major has to be going on. Like the entire world being slowly dominated and to an elf that's not slowly. I mean, there it's if something happens over a 20-year period of time, that's super fast to an elf. Like, what do you mean? It was just tea time, and now you're telling me that they're at our front door? How did that happen? All right. Uh-oh. So Jilla Rose, even though I've been talking all this, she hadn't heard anything. So someone please relay all the things that I have said to Jilla Rose. Um, Especially since we were her timely arrival at Undead Elf. It is recorded, yes. Okay. Um. Okay. Any other questions? And hopefully that timeline helps you understand a little bit more about elves and why undead elves are only partially undead. you know, like I said, the closest they come to is Dampier because they have all the strengths and weaknesses of the undead without being connected to the negative plane. Whether or not Lynn is a banshee or an undead or a vampire, I can't answer that. Okay, he could be either. I'm not sure if he's a vampiric elf or a banshee. I thought he was a vampire. In which case, that is the same. Okay. Jilla Vlas, go ahead and ask your question. Because when I roll out here, when I close this in 4 minutes, I will, I mean, even if you want to type it, that's okay. When I close this in 4 minutes, I am rolling out because the White Knight event is happening in 30. I still need to go get my laundry out of the dryer, fold it, put it away, have a cigarette, a cup of coffee, and try to do that all in 30 minutes. I don't know. We'll see what I can get done, right? Okay. Okay. Thank you for a question. Mithril is a magical silver metal. Yes, there is a link because mithril comes from Yggdrasil. Okay? Mithril is not a native metal to Terra. Okay? So if you find it, then it has come from Yggdrasil with the elves. Okay? That's why it's special. If you find a vein in the deep rose, for instance, of mithril, or it has come from Yggdrasil. When the elves crossed over, they brought Yggdrasil, they brought mithril with them. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay. I don't know if it's IC or OC. I'm going to be me because I always am. So I can't answer that beyond that. I will be there. All right. There we go. It's semi IC. So I'll be there. I'll either be the game master or the magician because I'm both of those people depending on if I'm IC or OC. If I'm IC, I'm the magician. If I'm OC, I'm the game master. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. We'll see you all in about half hour. They're the White Rangers are learning to role play. So always help them when you get the chance. Because role play is fun. And everybody deserves to do it. All right. Belados for your attendance. Bendos for now.